What does Vietnam taste like? Is it a steaming bowl of pho? Is it smoky grilled pork served with fresh herbs? Or maybe, it sounds like a small paper bag opening on a busy street, followed by the crunch of a freshly baked baguette.
And if that crunch is followed by the smell of pate, grilled meat, fresh cucumber, herbs, and something slightly spicy, you may have just discovered one of Vietnam's most famous foods, banh mi.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Eric.
And I'm Linda. Today, we're talking about a food that looks simple, costs relatively little, can be eaten in just a few minutes, but has a surprisingly big story.
Because banh mi is not simply a sandwich, it is a story about history, cultural exchange, creativity, street life, and the way Vietnamese people can take an outside influence and turn it into something unmistakably their own.
And we're going to talk about the history behind it, why it tastes so good, the different versions you can find across Vietnam, some famous places to try it, and why this humble street food has become known far beyond the country.
But before we get into all of that, Linda, I have an important question. If I put 5 different banh mi in front of you right now.
Only 5?
Yes. Which one are you choosing?
You're asking me to make a life-changing decision before breakfast.
Exactly.
Then I'd probably choose grilled pork banh mi, the smoky meat, the fresh herbs, the pickles, the crispy bread. Honestly, I can already smell it.
And that's probably a good place to begin. So let's take a bite.
If you're hearing the word banh mi for the first time, you might assume it is simply the Vietnamese word for a sandwich, but there's an interesting detail here. In Vietnamese, banh mi literally means bread. In English, however, when people say banh mi, they usually mean the Vietnamese-style sandwich.
And that sandwich usually starts with a light, crisp baguette. The bread is open lengthwise and filled with some combination of meat, pate, Vietnamese cold cuts, eggs, grilled meat, cucumber, pickled vegetables, herbs, chili, sauces, or other local ingredients.
And there isn't one single recipe. That's important. There is no universal formula that every banh mi vendor follows. A banh mi in Hanoi may taste different from one in Ho Chi Minh City. A sandwich in Hoi An may be completely different from one in Hai Phong. Even 2 shops on the same street can have their own bread, pate, sauce, or filling.
So perhaps the best way to define banh mi is not as one specific recipe, but as a Vietnamese food tradition built around bread and fillings.
Exactly, and that's where the story becomes really interesting.
To understand banh mi, we need to go back more than a century. The baguette arrived in Vietnam during the French colonial period. Bread and other French culinary influences gradually became part of Vietnamese food culture. But Vietnamese cooks didn't simply copy French food, they adapted it.
And adaptation is really the key word. The Vietnamese version developed around local tastes and ingredients. Instead of treating the baguette simply as French bread, people began combining it with things that were much more familiar to Vietnamese palates: pate, local meats, fresh herbs, cucumber, pickled vegetables, chili, and sauces.
So what began with a foreign influence eventually became something distinctly Vietnamese.
And that's one reason banh mi is such an interesting food culturally. It's not a story of one cuisine replacing another, it's a story of transformation.
Exactly, the baguette may have come from France, but the sandwich that developed in Vietnam reflects Vietnamese ingredients, Vietnamese tastes, Vietnamese eating habits, and Vietnamese creativity.
And over time, banh mi became part of ordinary life. It wasn't created as an expensive restaurant dish, it became practical street food, something you could buy quickly on your way to school, work, or wherever you were going.
And that's still true today. You don't necessarily need a reservation, you don't need a fancy restaurant. Sometimes you just need to find a small food stall, tell the vendor what you want, and wait a few minutes.
Which brings us to one of my favorite things about banh mi. It's incredibly simple, but it doesn't taste simple.
Let's imagine a classic banh mi. The first thing you notice is the bread. The outside should be crisp and light. Then you bite into it, and you get that crunch.
That crunch is important, because immediately after it, you get something soft and rich, maybe pate, maybe meat, maybe a creamy spread, and then something fresh, cucumber, herbs, and then the pickled vegetables.
Which brings acidity and a little sweetness.
And maybe chili.
And suddenly, you've got salty, sweet, sour, spicy, fresh, rich, crispy, and soft, all in one bite.
That's what I think makes banh mi so satisfying. It's a sandwich built around contrast.
And balance? You could have rich pate and fatty meat, but then the cucumber and herbs make the bite feel fresh. You could have crispy bread, but the fillings give you softness. You could have savory meat, but pickled vegetables add acidity.
It's almost like a tiny orchestra.
A very delicious orchestra.
Exactly. And here's another interesting part. The bread matters enormously, because even if your fillings are amazing, a heavy or poorly baked baguette can change the whole experience.
People say, it's just a sandwich. They're missing the point. The magic isn't one ingredient, it's the combination. Now, if you're visiting Vietnam for the first time, you may feel slightly overwhelmed by the choices. So let's make it easier. Linda, give me 4 banh mi styles that an international visitor should know.
Okay. Number 1, banh mi thit, banh mi with meat and traditional Vietnamese cold cuts. This is probably the version many international visitors imagine when they hear banh mi. It can include different kinds of Vietnamese pork products, pate, cucumber, pickled vegetables, herbs, and sauces.
Classic.
Very classic. Number 2, banh mi trung, egg banh mi.
That's the breakfast option, right?
Yes, and it can be wonderfully simple. Warm eggs, fresh bread, vegetables, herbs, and sauce. In different parts of Vietnam, you may also find versions with fried eggs served separately or inside the baguette.
Number 3,
Banh mi siêu mai. This one is especially interesting because instead of simply putting slices of meat inside the baguette, you get Vietnamese-style meatballs, often served with a rich sauce.
and number 4?
My personal favorite, banh mi thit nuong, grilled meat banh mi.
I knew you were going to choose that one.
Because grilled meat plus crispy bread plus herbs is a combination I refuse to argue with.
Fair enough, and that's only the beginning. You could also find banh mi with chicken, beef, shredded pork, tofu, eggs, and many creative modern fillings.
Which means there's no single correct banh mi, and honestly, that's part of the fun.
Now let's travel. Because one of the most interesting things about Vietnamese food is how regional it can be.
Let's start in Hoi An.
Hoi An is famous for its ancient town, lanterns, architecture, and food, and banh mi is an important part of its food culture.
2 famous names visitors often hear are Banh Mi Phuong and Madame Khan, the Banh Mi Queen. They have become well-known stops for people exploring Hoi An and looking for a local banh mi experience.
And Hoi An's banh mi is a great example of how the sandwich can become part of a travel memory. You're not just eating, you're walking through an old town. You hear bicycles and motorbikes, you see lanterns, you smell food from nearby stalls, and then someone hands you a warm banh mi wrapped in paper.
That's the kind of food memory people remember.
Now let's move south to Ho Chi Minh City.
This city has one of Vietnam's most energetic street food cultures, and banh mi is everywhere. One famous name is Huynh Hoa Banh Mi, known for its generous, rich style.
And then, let's go north to Hai Phong,
where we find something quite different, banh mi K. It's smaller, thinner, and very different in shape from the larger banh mi many visitors know. It's especially associated with pate and spicy flavors.
So if someone tells you, I've tried banh mi in Vietnam, that doesn't necessarily mean they've experienced the whole story.
Exactly, you may need several cities, and several sandwiches.
That's a research project I can support.
But there's something else we shouldn't forget. Banh mi isn't only interesting because it tastes good, it's also connected to everyday life.
Think about a normal morning in Vietnam. Someone is going to school, someone is heading to work, someone is starting a long day. They stop at a small food stall, the vendor opens the bread, adds the fillings, wraps it up, and hands it over. The whole process can take only a few minutes.
And that's what makes street food so powerful. It's ordinary, it's part of the rhythm of life.
For visitors, it can become a travel experience. For Vietnamese people, it can simply be breakfast.
And sometimes food becomes memory. For Vietnamese people living far from home, the taste of banh mi can remind them of childhood, family, school, or a familiar neighborhood.
And for travelers, it can become a memory of Vietnam itself. Maybe you remember eating it while walking through Hoi An. Maybe you sat on a tiny plastic chair in Ho Chi Minh City. Maybe you found a small vendor on a street you can't even remember the name of.
But you remember the taste.
Exactly. That's the difference between food that simply fills you up and food that becomes part of your story. So here's the big question. How did a street sandwich become an international food?
Well, part of the answer is that banh mi is surprisingly easy to understand. People everywhere know what a sandwich is.
Right? You don't have to explain the basic concept. It's bread. There are fillings. You take a bite.
But then the flavor introduces you to something new. Pate, pickled vegetables, fresh herbs, Vietnamese meats, chili, different sauces.
So it's familiar enough to be approachable, but different enough to be exciting.
Exactly, and international food media and travel culture have helped introduce banh mi to audiences around the world. Major food and travel publications have repeatedly highlighted it as one of the world's notable sandwiches and street foods. Vietnam's official tourism site has also highlighted its international appeal and the enormous variety found across the country.
And that's an interesting journey. A food influenced by another culture becomes deeply Vietnamese, and then travels around the world.
But I think there's an important point here. When banh mi becomes popular internationally, it doesn't stop being Vietnamese.
Exactly. Globalization doesn't necessarily erase identity. Sometimes it spreads it.
Eric, let me ask you something. If the baguette came from France, what makes banh mi Vietnamese?
I think the answer is everything that happened after the baguette arrived. The ingredients, the sauces, the herbs, the pickles, the meats, the way the sandwich is prepared, the way it's eaten, and most importantly, the way Vietnamese people made it part of everyday life.
So the identity isn't necessarily in one ingredient.
No, it's in the combination.
I like that, because maybe that's what food culture really is, not a list of ingredients, but a story of how people use those ingredients.
And banh mi tells a particularly interesting story of adaptation. Something arrived from outside, Vietnamese people adapted it, they added their own ingredients and tastes. Different regions developed different styles, and eventually, the result became something recognized around the world as Vietnamese.
A French origin bread, a Vietnamese transformation, a global sandwich.
That's banh mi.
So, after everything we've talked about, I think we can agree on one thing.
That we're hungry?
That too, but also that banh mi is much more than a convenient meal.
It's history.
It's street culture.
It's creativity.
It's regional diversity.
And for many people,
it's a memory.
If you've never tried banh mi, here's our challenge. Don't start by looking for the fanciest restaurant. Find a good local vendor, watch how the sandwich is made. Listen to the bread being cut open. Smell the herbs and grilled meat, and then
take that first bite.
Don't analyze it too much.
Just listen to the crunch.
And then decide for yourself.
Maybe you'll understand why this small sandwich has such a big story.
And that's where we'll leave our journey today. From the arrival of the baguette in Vietnam, to the streets of Hoi An, Ho Chi Minh City, Hai Phong, and beyond, banh mi has continued to change while keeping its unmistakable Vietnamese character.
So whether you're a food lover, a traveler, or simply someone curious about another culture, banh mi is a delicious place to start.
Because sometimes, you don't need a complicated dish to tell a big story.
Sometimes, all you need is a piece of bread,
a few great ingredients,
and a very hungry person.
Thank you for listening.
And if you ever visit Vietnam,
don't just look for the famous landmarks.
Look for the little food stall on the street.
You might find something unforgettable.
And maybe
you'll find your favorite banh mi.